to you from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, this is GovLove, a podcast about local government. I'm Lauren Palmer, partner and co-founder of EverStrive Solutions, and your host for this episode. GovLove is produced by ELGL, the Engaging Local Government Leaders Network. This week, ELGL is on site at the International City County Management Conference, the premier gathering for local government management officials. We are recording GovLove each day to share the latest topics and trends in local government with our listening audience. My guest for today's episode is Anton Tony Gardner. Tony is the Senior Director of the Commonwealth Center for High Performance Organizations. We're talking about Tony's impressive career in local government that is being honored this year at the ICMA Conference with an ICMA Distinguished Service Award. Tony, welcome to GovLove.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
I'm so glad you could join us. It's a big honor to have a Distinguished Service Award winner on the podcast.
Well, thank you.
Before we start our interview, Tony, we always like to do a quick lightning round of fun questions just to get to know our guests a little bit better. So my first question for you is, what is your most controversial non-political opinion? Almost nothing
is worth watching on television.
Oh, this is controversial.
I think so.
People,
particularly since my daughter's been on all the networks.
Tell me more about that. What is your?
She's an actress.
Oh, so, she is.
Yes.
Is she someone we would know or have seen in something?
Well, you might have seen her, but you probably wouldn't know her.
Okay. So this is fascinating. You have a daughter who's an actress, but you don't care much for television. What do you like? Theater or books or?
I do both.
Okay.
And. Movies.
Yeah. We're here in Pittsburgh for the conference. What have you enjoyed most about Pittsburgh so far?
Well, it's only been a few days,
yes.
Right? And a lot of it has been inside.
Inside the conference center, right?
But we did get to walk around a lot. And Pittsburgh has a reputation of having wonderful Art Deco buildings, and we have seen a number of them, and it's a well-deserved reputation.
They've got some really cool architecture.
Yeah.
It's been fun to walk around and look at neat buildings.
Exactly, yeah.
Tony, you've had a distinguished career. I'm sure you've been to a lot of conferences like this one. What's your best tip for maximizing the conference experience?
Well, I think that best tips, I have two, is to actually look at the schedule in advance and figure out what's interesting for you and where you want to be. And then the second thing is to consider the things outside the conference that you want to see or experience.
Yeah, good advice. It's always good to travel to a different place and kind of get a different perspective. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for playing our lightning round. We're going to get into the heart of our interview.
All right.
We want to hear about your incredible career path and what led you into your current role. You have worked in a lot of different sectors in local government. You've got some international experience, academia, and now, of course, at the Commonwealth Center. So maybe just walk us through that. Start with your local government background.
Well, you know that I started in Arlington and actually wound up ending in Arlington 27 years later or so. And I got into Arlington in an odd way. I'd been in the Air Force for 4 years and was actually stationed in Arlington at the Defense Intelligence Agency.
Okay. I didn't realize you had a military background, so we'll add that to your resume.
4 years there during the war. And I went to look for a job, and I went around and some government stuff, and I applied at Procter & Gamble, and I went relatively deep into the process of hiring for them, and one of the steps was an all-day session of tests.
Okay.
The aptitude tests and the likes and whatever, and at the end of the day, late in the evening, like at 11 o'clock, the guy I'd been working with called and said, well, we gone over your tests and everything, look really good and everything, except that we think you'd probably do better in public service than you would in Procter & Gamble.
Fascinating. I can't believe they gave you that advice.
Right, exactly. It was strange, because I had been looking in local government and maybe a little on the Hill, and that night, it just convinced me that I wanted to work in public service. I'd studied county management in grad school. I had a course in county government and others. And so I said, might as well do it. And I was working in Arlington, so I applied in Arlington and eventually got the job and was excited about it.
What was that first job that you had?
I was the assistant to the county manager.
Assistant to the county manager.
One of the gophers
Yeah.
in many places. But it was a wonderful job because you probably didn't hear my remarks yesterday, but I started off by talking about working for Bert Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the third Arlington County manager to be president of ICMA way back in 1963. So when I started working with him, I got the spiel about how wonderful it was. Not only the spiel, but I got introduced to the executive director, the ICMA as an organization, its people, and I have been an aficionado for all those years. And I really think it's the best way for people in local government to get the support they need.
That's incredible. I did hear your comments yesterday, and you have a connection with another Distinguished Service Award winner.
Yes.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
Well, Ron Carlee.
Yes.
So later on, maybe we'll talk about the things that I did. One of the things that I was very lucky to do was to recruit great people, not only at the executive level, but throughout the organization. So it's a place that has a really good reputation for people who work there and people like to come to work there. And so I hired Ron Carlee, who is the one of the other two Distinguished Service Award winners. And then I also have at least one of the ICMA board is an alumnus of Arlington. And so we have strong relationships and keep in contact.
Yeah. That's great.
Ron did a great job. And if you heard my remarks, I also said that people poked at me a lot and kind of, cajoled me to do the right thing. And Ron was vocally one of them.
And I mean, clearly he's exceptional too. So that's great. I love that connection.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about the other aspects of your career. At some point you got to go abroad. You did some international work.
Yeah, I had in Arlington, worked with the Virginia Association of Local Governments, and we started up a program of relationships with people and managers in Poland, and it was eventually supported by the federal government. And we had managers from the U.S. going to Poland for a period of time, 2-4 weeks, and then we brought managers from Poland back to Virginia. Frequently, they went to the SCI program that you mentioned.
Of course.
And then they lived and worked with a manager or in the manager's community for up to a month around Virginia. So that occasioned me to go to Poland on a number of times, and triggered this interest, which also started in graduate school, in international work.
Okay.
So when I left Arlington, I went to work in Poland with a program that was helping the transition from the communist way, which still was preserved in many local governments, in a modified way. And we worked with, I think, over 50 governments. And I stayed doing it a year. During the time that I was there, the Polish government suspended all of what we would think of as city councils.
Okay, oh my goodness.
And so they were all in disarray. And it was very hard to accomplish things during that period of time. But after a year, thereabouts, it was enough, and I came back to Virginia and started then at the University of Virginia.
That's great perspective for our listeners. Like, whatever frustration you have with your city council, it could be worse.
It could be
the federal
worse.
government could come in and dissolve them.
Exactly
so
right.
Be grateful for what you have. All right, great. So then you come back to Virginia, and you also did some work in academia.
Yes, so I started at the University of Virginia and worked with the Cooper Center for Public Service, and I was working with a couple of organizations, and then started to work with the program that provides the LEAD program, and then the Senior Executive Institute, and taught there, and eventually became the director of the SCI and LEAD program for a number of years. And then simultaneously started to work with the Commonwealth Centers for I can't say it. It's my own company. The Commonwealth Centers for High Performance Organizations, and started to teach some of the modules of that. And then when I left, well, I guess actually while I was doing that full-time, not full-time, but part-time. And the full-time job was both working at the UVA and also doing this teaching in local governments around the country and in consulting and developing high-performance organizations from coast to coast.
It's incredible.
Yeah, so we have, a lot of alumni here.
Oh, I'm sure you do. Yeah. Well, thank you for that overview. You've had a far-reaching career, and it's reflected in the award. And just as a little background for our listeners who may not be ICMA members and familiar, the Distinguished Service Award is conferred by the ICMA Executive Board, and it recognizes managers who have been judged by their peers as exceptional and have made major contributions beyond direct service to local government. So it's not an overstatement to say that this is like the local government equivalent of the Olympic gold medal, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. This is the Academy Award for Best Director in Local Government. This is a big deal, and I'm really proud to have the opportunity to visit with you about the contributions that you have made in government beyond just your direct service in Arlington County.
Well, thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
So we want to talk about this. Let's just start with, how were you notified that you received the award? I have a vision in my head that the executive director of ICMA shows up at your front door with balloons and a gift basket. What was it really like? How'd you find out?
No, it was an early morning call.
Okay, early morning call.
from the executive director saying that it had been decided to do that, and said that he hoped I could be here.
Yes.
And so I had to change things to come here, but I, in fact, am here.
I'm glad you did.
For a couple of days, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful. Well, it says in the award criteria that the award celebrates a, quote, pattern of support to peers, colleagues, and young people entering the profession as a mentor, counselor, or a sage. And I really picked up on that because our organization, Engaging Local Government Leaders, really celebrates that notion of helping people find their way in the profession. So I've got a few questions for you under that umbrella, Tony. First, who is one of your mentors, and what made that relationship meaningful for you?
Well, I have two that I mentioned yesterday, so I want to cheat a little bit.
That's okay. Not all of our listeners heard your remarks, so it would be great for you to elaborate.
Yeah, so the two people are Bob Mattson and John Pickering. So we'll talk about Mattson first. He worked at UVA at the Cooper Center and was my predecessor as the director of the LEAD program in the Senior Executive Institute. And he had a long, distinguished career in academia, and was president of a college, head of the Federal Executive Institute, and done a lot of consulting. So was a good person to listen to
Yeah.
and to learn from. And both he and Pickering, once I'd been to SEI, I went to the first SEI that there was. I went to that as a member, as a participant, right? And then met Bob there and Pickering soon after. And we brought them into Arlington to help transform the organization. So we might speak about that a little bit later. So they both helped me and mentored me, Bob at the university and in my role there, and then both of them in Arlington, and then John Pickering, the other, helped me in joining his business, CCHPO, and eventually transferring the business to me as the one who would follow on. And he taught me. He was rigorous. We do a 3-day seminar. To give you an example, before I ever did the 3-day seminar, I had to go through 8 versions of it.
Okay.
And to learn how to do everything quite right. And then every time I started doing pieces of it, he would write notes in the back of the room, thorough notes, I would say, which, of course, I actually now do with people who are learning to do it now.
The mentee becomes the mentor, right? That's perfect. Well, that's a good segue. Mm-hmm. I love this term in the award criteria, a sage. Do you consider yourself a sage?
Well, I don't know. It's a big word. I would say that I see myself as, in that vein, as a coach, as an advisor. I do a lot of coaching. We do a lot of teaching, too, but also help people develop, because it's a development program. Mm-hmm. And, people come with questions and things to puzzle through, and they look for answers. And usually the last thing I want to give is an answer, mm-hmm. right? And it makes it hard because frequently people walk away angry.
Oh.
Because I believe it's not such a good idea to tell people what to do. And so people come for consultation and think that they're going to get direction. Mm-hmm. And I think that's not the best way to help people. Yeah. So it's sort of more like talking with people and asking questions and discussing alternatives so that people choose what they want to do, and then are not inclined to later go back and say, I did what he said and it didn't work.
Yeah, right.
But
and you're helping people develop that critical thinking.
Exactly.
To make their
it
decisions.
Is that process. And I think when you work with someone, what happens is you can open doors to areas that they haven't thought about, mm-hmm. and to explore connections between things which they have done compared to what they're doing now, and seeing what worked then, which might help now, which they might never have thought about if you hadn't reopened the door they'd been on.
So your approach to mentoring is inquisition.
Well, that's kind of the harsh version of it.
Okay. Maybe you would characterize it differently. How would you characterize your approach to mentoring?
I would say it's consultation.
Consultation. Better word. Very good.
Although there have been those who would have said that, what you said.
Right. The ones who walked away angry. They were probably angry for a moment, but grateful in the long run.
Maybe.
Yeah. Distinguished Service Award winners have a history of developing and implementing innovative programs. Mm-hmm. What's one of your proudest innovations as you reflect on your career?
I also want to talk about two.
Great.
So, and when I say I don't want to talk about things I personally did necessarily. So the first one is you may be familiar with places that have permit parking on the street.
Yeah, sure.
Lots of places, right? Invented in Arlington.
Is that right?
Not only that, but sued. We were sued for it.
Oh, right.
And
every great innovation has a lawsuit.
Right. So the innovation was developed by a little from Public Works and me and the county attorney who really drove this, putting it into legal framework, and then had to go to and personally argued at the Supreme Court of the United States in order to get the Supreme Court to bless that people now can have permit parking in this country.
This is fascinating. I never knew this. I would have just assumed it would be, Arlington is a big urban area, but I don't know. I guess I would envision Chicago or New York or places with bigger parking challenges.
No, they were copycats.
They were copycats. Okay. That is a big innovation. You said there were two that you wanted to talk about.
So the second one, so you thinking back like into the 80s, 1980s, 90s, we were trying to figure out what to do with some land that we had, and we needed new facilities. So while I think maybe some others had begun to do this, we decided to do a public-private partnership, which of course was not the term that people used way back then. And we worked with a private company that had developed a good portion of an area called Roslyn. Called Crystal City in Arlington. And we negotiated a deal to take the land that we had that was adjacent to our existing building and convert it into a 2-building high-rise complex. And we rented and still rent. They still rent the one building. And then the other one was private sector oriented. I think 400 apartments, movie theaters, and a large hotel.
Okay.
And with parking for everybody, for the public.
Wow.
On that thing. And it didn't cost us anything except, of course, rent.
I can't believe you were doing a P3 development back in the 80s.
Yeah, it was not heard about very much then.
Yeah. What? Did a developer come to you? Like, what was the impetus for the idea?
So it was the 80s and the 90s, and we actually got it accomplished in the 90s. We started in the 80s. We did an RFP for developers.
Got it.
And we also had a consultant help us a little, and the Smith companies did the right thing for us.
I'm impressed. All right. You've seen and experienced and influenced a lot in your career. What do you think is the next big trend or challenge for local government managers?
Yeah, this is people don't like to hear me talk about this so much.
Oh, I can't wait to hear what this is. Okay.
Particularly when we're going around local governments. So 5, 7, 10 years ago, we started saying that most jobs that are represented in the room won't be here in 20 years. And if they are, they're radically different. Mm-hmm. And you heard the speaker yesterday.
Yes.
And
say something about that, because not all of our listeners heard the speaker.
So the speaker was talking about artificial intelligence.
Yep.
And the ways in which it will permeate our lives pretty fast from now, coming really quickly. And what we would talk about would be that there would be radical changes in jobs. A lot of the jobs that were represented in the room would be radically shifted or not exist. Mm-hmm. And that part of the job of local government, first for its own employees, is to help its own employees look to the future and become more enabled to be successful in what is likely to occur. And also then to begin to see the things the techniques, the systems that could help transition to the world that would be. And then the other part of the job of local government is to help people in their community understand the same thing, and to build the capacity within the community for people to be able to job train differently, prepare themselves with skills that are appropriate, and to facilitate matching people with skills and jobs in a changing world. So when we would say that to people, they would get irate. I remember.
Yeah, say more about that. I don't think what you're saying is really outrageous. I mean, I think you're right.
Yeah. So maybe 7 years ago, people viewed it outrageous, like the people who were saying nobody will be able to take our jobs away because they'll always need us to mow the grass and to clear the fields with the grass mowers, and maybe you'll get better equipment, but we'll be driving them. Well, not so long after we did that in one community, several people from the grass mowing area came to the city manager and said, we'd like to see if we can find the computerized robot mowers and then develop them for what we're doing, and then we can become the people who run them and fix them. And so now they do that here. They'd already been doing it. I saw it in the early 90s in Germany, people in their backyards, but none in the U.S. at that time. So you had to think about these things a little bit down the road. I did get a lot of flack from the cops when I told them that in one Middle Eastern company they already had robot police officers. They nearly ran me out of the room.
Yeah, I can see that generating some dialogue. Well, to that point, what are the skills that are most important for today's managers to develop that prepare them for that trend of changing work?
Well, I think that they have to become attuned to the future themselves. So they have to develop the skills to look ahead, analyze, discern, and then follow through with what they've learned to build the capacity in their organizations to meet what's coming. Now, you say, well, that's typical strategic planning, but it's more than strategic planning, which frequently is just looking at what kinds of things we know and see coming down the path that are similar to what we've been, but to see the new things that are going to influence how people work. People are wrestling now in cities with empty office buildings, right? And I had talked with the now former city manager of Las Vegas, who was saying that Las Vegas, they're realizing, this was maybe 10 years ago now, that their office buildings and maybe even some of their hotels need to be cleared and to be made into residential. Right? And I think you see a trend of that happening, so that it's a precursor of what happened after COVID or during COVID. So it's this developing the skills of foresight and then translation, so that people with whom you work might also understand those things, and then together both the manager and the rest of the people in the organization trying to figure out how the same principles apply to them and what sort of skills they need in order to do not the current job only, but the jobs that are going to emerge. So you have to predict what those jobs are going to be in the organization. You have to see what it would take to do them. You have to skill up to make it happen. And then you have to think and apply all of that towards whom you're recruiting and bringing new people in. So it means that you think about whom you're recruiting and what their requirements are differently than you did before you began to look ahead.
Yeah.
So that's a range of skills.
You're giving me a lot to think about in terms of foresight. I'd love to challenge you to exercise some hindsight.
Mm-hmm.
If we rewind the clock to 1987 and pretend you're starting your first year as the county manager in Arlington County, what's one piece of advice that you wish you could give to your former self that might be helpful for our listeners?
Well, I think the advice would have 2 or 3 parts. The first one was, you're not as smart as you think you are.
No, that's hard to hear.
Yes, indeed. The second is, you don't know as much as you think you know. And the third is, you need more help than you think you know. So if I'd listened to those who said that, I'd have been better off. All right.
Can you give an example?
Oh, sure. There are a number of things where I felt that I had the right solution, and others said, no, that's not the right decision. And turned out they were right.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. And so we had some issues that we had to deal with. And part of that, though, was the learning process for me, right? And luckily I had Mattson and Pickering to help me understand that doing it alone was dumb. And so we began to have a leadership team that was much more collaborative. And it had to go through all those growth pains of transforming from someone who worked for me, the old me, into someone who could trust me to be more collaborative. And then we had to then do that same learning curve for managers throughout the organization.
I see.
Because, you know, if the 70s, 80s, people learned to manage in a certain way, and it was pretty directive in most organizations, and those typical autocratic systems that worked for a time in some respects, but by the 90s and the 80s, 70s, well, I guess, you know, I was through it that whole time. We were going through radical shifting of what was happening, and if we hadn't spent time trying to energize people to be proactive and collaborative, would have been way behind. But because I think we had an environment where people felt free to bring up new ideas and to challenge decisions, because we had that, we were able to do things that were pretty dang innovative and creative and pretty autonomously in the organization.
Build a collaborative team.
Yeah.
I like it.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, we had a technical difficulty and lost the recording of my final question with Tony. Regular GovLove listeners will know that we always ask our guests, if you could be the GovLove DJ, what song would you pick as our exit music for this episode? Tony chose Help by the Beatles, echoing his advice that you don't know as much as you think you do, and to rely on the talent of the team around you. By building collaborative organizations where different perspectives are valued, we make better decisions that lead to better outcomes for communities. So don't be afraid to look for help and to give help on your local government journey. That ends our episode for today. Thanks so much to our guest, ICMA Distinguished Service Award winner Tony Gardner, and to our partner, ICMA. Thank you for listening. You can reach us at elgl.org/govlove or on social media at GovLove Podcast. This has been GovLove, a podcast about local government.